lump examination as to see their competency in physical science, demonstrating physical science. So usually you get these lumps in short cases. Short cases, you get about 3 short cases for 15 minutes. So roughly around 5 minutes per lump. So it is basically a short history and then physical science to recognize the lump. So this physical science in recognizing a lump, the objective is to recognize lump as accurate as possible. So there are 3 main aspects of a lump we expect. Or if you demonstrate physical science in relation to these 3 main aspects, 95% of the time you will be able to recognize the lump or make an accurate diagnosis. The first most important thing is the anatomical site. By looking, you don't have to touch the patient. Right? Anatomical site of the lump, you should be able to express where this lump is. Because some lumps are very common in a particular site and some lumps never occur in a particular site. So both facts are important when making a diagnosis. The second most important thing is the tissue plane. Right? We will discuss about tissue plane and how it is helpful in recognizing a lump. Third, and again, very important aspect of a lump is what is it made up of, or the consistency of the lump, whether it is a cystic lump or made up of fluid, solid matter, right, like that. So today we start with Dr. Pramod.
Can I ask questions, sir?
Sure.
Yeah. Now, when we study, let's say when you look at the Roman browse,
yes,
we see that chart on lumps.
Yeah.
You have to remember size, shape.
There are 9
aspects. So the typical, even when we study the medical students, we used to remember these 9 things and try to put, when you after examining the lump, you try to, not 3.
Yeah.
No, more than.
Rohan asked a very valid question because as an examiner, most of the time I come across students try to stick into that. They come with size, shape, servers, so that way. But I think to recognize or to make a diagnosis, now those things also sort of are included here, but the more practical and the more rational way of approaching a lump is to recognize where this lump is, the anatomical locality, and the tissue plane, which plane of the body is this lump. And if you know these two enough, even, then you know about 80% of the time what it is, because certain lumps never occur in certain sites, and a particular site in a given tissue plane, very few lumps are there, right? And the size, shape, surface, those things tell us more about other refined information. And when you know the consistency of the lump also in a given plane, then you know for sure what it is. So I think, Rohan, I haven't come across this classification in any textbook, but I have seen even other examiners want these 3 aspects, not even in Sri Lanka, in other countries, when someone is describing a lump.
Yeah. Just to add to that, now I think as medical students, what we try to do is we try to remember the steps and put your lump into those 9 steps. But when we, as clinicians, when we look at the lump, that our objective is to come to a diagnosis. To come to the diagnosis, this is how we look at a lump. What we are going to discuss now, not to put your lump into these 9 steps. And there is one. And the other thing is now.
Should we always come to diagnosis as such in case of a lump? Because sometimes we are also not very sure as to what it is. So we need adult imaging kind of things.
Of course, yes. This is what we are trying to make is our objective is to make a clinical diagnosis is as accurate as possible. Now, when you try to describe a place like sort of when someone asks you where the Ragam hospital is, right? You can tell him, right? You come from Mahabaghe, just after the flyover, on your left-hand side is Ragam Hospital. This is a pretty accurate description for someone to find Ragam Hospital. At the same time, you can give Google coordinates or GPS coordinates. Right? That may not very palatable for the most, right? But it is more accurate. So if someone wants to sort of find this place and sort of the amount of water and the water levels, so you can give more accurate things as well. So clinical diagnosis, I think in lump examination, we try to sort of achieve more practical diagnosis. Most of the time we are getting that. Sometimes we may not get, as you say. So to refine it, if you need sort of more information, you can do other investigations, especially radiology, different types of radiological investigation and biochemistry as well, when needs arise.
Yeah. Should we say that in case we are not very sure as to what it is, should we give a different diagnosis instead of tentative diagnosis rather than just specify to this is the one? So what I'm talking about the exact situation. So
yeah. Sometimes you may get sort of more than one diagnosis. Very correct.
I will start from
Can this Asili can hear?
they can see the video now. So I will start from where students stop. So why these three are important is when we expect the student to perform a short case, both of us, the examiner and the student, even in the clinical practice, we go with a presumption for the examination part, right? And as I said, site is the first and the most important aspect because that presumption is based on the site, right? That is why we don't try to elicit all these 9 steps into every lump because we go with a presumption based on the anatomical site. As I said, some are more common in one anatomical site and some are impossible to occur in certain anatomical sites. So the presumption, right? Both of us know, the student also knows sometimes what the final diagnosis is. As you can see here on the right side, most of us will know what the diagnosis is, but we want to see whether you have the clinical skills to elicit the clinical signs and confirm your diagnosis. Right? Final diagnosis might come in FNAC or MRI scan or ultrasound, but if you can make a clinical diagnosis, you should be able to elicit these clinical signs. So, and the other thing I tell the students is, imagine you're telling your consultant about you're describing this lesion over the phone, and the consultant should be able to come to a diagnosis, right? So if you practice like that, it's very easy. So most of the time, if we show this lump to a student, he will say there is a lump, hemispherical in space, in the shape, and it's about 2 by 3 centimeters in size. The margins are very distinct. The surface is smooth. It's in the subcutaneous plane. Now, if I'm listening to this over the phone, I cannot, even after you telling me not 9, you telling me about 25 facts, I'm still not able to come to a clinical diagnosis, right? I'm lost, right? Even after you talking to me for 1 minute, describing this lesion for 1 minute, I'm still lost. It's a lump, hemispherical size, subcutaneous, smooth surface, distinct margin. But if you take the phone and say, sir, there is a lump in the dorsum of the hand, from your first sentence, my clinical diagnosis is about 90% fulfilled, right? Because 35-year-old male coming with a lump in the dorsum of the hand. First thing that comes to my mind is it a ganglion? The rest of the information you give me will confirm either it is a ganglion or it is not a ganglion, right? If you tell me it is in the plane of the skin, then I know, okay, it's not a ganglion. It can be a sebaceous cyst or an implantation or something else. But the moment you tell me the site, some of my So this is basically the hypothetical deductive technique, right? That's what we do in short cases. So the moment you tell me that there is a lump in the dorsum of the hand, hernia does not come into my mind. The lymph node does not come into my mind, right? So that is why the anatomical site is very, very important. And if you tell me there is a lump at the near the olecranon process of the ulna, the first thing that comes to my mind is olecranon bursa, right? The student's error. I'm not going to suspect again a hernia or a vascular lump over the olecranon bursa, right? So that the anatomical site gives the listener or the examiner in your exam cases about 90% of your clinical diagnosis, and we can just exclude most of the things and focus on few particular things. If you say the groin area, there is a lump in the groin. There can be a hernia, it can be a lymph node, it can be a vascular lump, okay, it can be a lipoma, but then the list of the importance, we create it, and the rest of the examination, we approach accordingly. There's a groin lump, we would ask the patient to cough and to see a cough impulse. If there is a cough impulse, then we know it's a hernia, and the rest of the examination will follow according to hernia. We're not going to assess the skin plane in that, right? But if you say cough and there is no impulse, then you palpate and see it's underneath the skin, then we go towards the lymph node. We are not going to see the fixity of a hernia, right? We are not going to do that. We are not going to even measure a hernia. It's not important for us, even the size of the hernia. So that way, anatomical site should be the first thing that you mention when you're approaching a short case, because it will guide you. As I said, we are going with the presumption. Dorsum of the hand, most likely to be a ganglion, right? And the rest of your examination is based on that. I have seen most of the time students trying to do all these into every lump, right? All these 9 factors they are trying to elicit in all lump. We don't do that. If you look at if there is a lump in the paraumbilical region, right? We are not going to see which plane of the skin. The first thing is it a hernia or not, right? So if we move on to the next slides, yeah. So there is a lump at the back, right? Now, this sort of thing, now, like the dorsum of the hand, the important thing is how you relate this anatomically, right? Now, if you say there is a lump at the back is a large area, right? So I won't be able to sort of picture that over the phone, right? So I imagine that the examiner is blind. So you need to be somewhat accurate, right? You can say in the left scapular region, okay? The suprascapular region for more accuracy, right? So you need to know the anatomical landmarks, the tip of the scapula or the acromion, right? So you need to know the anatomical landmarks to do this.
And with some clinical relevance as well. Sometimes the midline lump
Yes.
is a peculiar.
Yes, exactly. We'll come to some more lines, and if you say it's a midline, then I know what these are. Is it a dermoid? It's going to be a dermoid, right? So always short cases are focused, right? Sometimes students know the diagnosis. Students know what this is. They are trying to sort of act it out, saying, okay, I don't know what this is, so I'm going to do all these 9 things. And sometimes it looks stupid. You try to transilluminate a 1 centimeter size lump, which you can't do, right? I even recently had an exam at another university. I saw someone trying to transilluminate a sebaceous cyst, which was less than 1 centimeter in size. And it looks really stupid, right? So you do a focused examination in lump. And the first, as Sundar rightly mentioned, the first and the most important aspect is the site, because it gives you a great detail about what you are going to do and what you are going to encounter. Okay, so now, for example, on the right, there is a lump at the back near the tip of the right scapula. Right? So at least at that level of clinical accuracy should be there. Okay, so you need to know the anatomical landmarks, right? Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. So again, as you see, now there is a lump in the umbilical region. Okay. So what we do here will be the hernia examination. You will not be eliciting all those 9 signs as Sundar said. I mean, in this lump, there is a lump in the paraumbilical region pushing the umbilicus into a crescentic shape I don't want to know whether it's 4 centimeter or 6 centimeter or 9 centimeter. I don't think that this is important. If at all in a hernia, the defect, size of the defect is what is going to be important. Not the size of the hernia, because this will vary. Once the patient lie down, the hernia will be lesser in size. So there's no point in measuring this. And you should be confident enough to not to do that also, I think, at the exam. That shows maturity.
One more thing, I've seen our students trying to measure it. I've seen some of the students trying to measure the lump size by rough measurements. How about that? So,
yeah, I think hemispherical lesions, to measure, you need a vernier caliper, right? Otherwise, you can't measure with a tape. The only way to measure it is with a vernier caliper. So, other than that, what you can do, you can give a rough assessment, but don't put a lot of effort and time and effort into saying the size, because it is not sometimes, most of the time, it is not very important, right? Even if it's an aneurysm, the size of the aneurysm will be measured by ultrasound. We are not going to debate on the clinical size. And if you are measuring, sometimes you can give even relative ones, like size of an orange or a pear or a plum or a pea. That's what basically most of the time you see in the UK, what people do. But don't put a lot of effort into trying to measure this, right? Because especially in hernias, people try to say the size of the hernia. And on the right, you can see an incision, right? And over the incision, there is a lump. So this will guide you that it's going to be it's most likely to be incisional hernia. So the next thing you do is not to elicit the plane of the skin, but to say cough. And then you see the cough impulse. And then you go along the hernia examination pathway, right? Next one. Yeah. Couple of more seconds.
How about the examination of abdomen in this kind of case? Say there's obviously a hernia here.
Yeah. So, right, okay, so that's about the anatomical side. Please, that is like about 90% of the students never mention the anatomical side. They presume that, okay, you can see where it is, right? So I don't need to mention that. As I say, when you practice is as if you're describing this lesion to your consultant over the phone, right? So you should be able to make a clinical, sort of imagine the clinical picture of the patient. Right? That's a skill that you need to acquire as a doctor, because you need to communicate with your colleagues, right? So saying the anatomical side first up is very important when you're describing any lesion. All right? Okay, so let's move on to the next step.
So just to summarize what Pramod said, let's say a patient comes to you. This is a patient. It can be anything. The diagnosis can be anything. Then you narrow it down. We said, well, let's say when you, for example, let's say the wrist, there are certain anatomical structures under the wrist. For example, you get tendons, you get the joint, you get the nerves, you get arteries. So these are the structures that can give rise to a lump in this region. So you narrow down based on the anatomical structures. Okay, these are the possible structures that can give rise to this lump. Then you think, okay, what are the common ones? What is the commonest? If you look at the wrist, the commonest is a ganglion. So 90, maybe 95%, I would say, of the time it can be a ganglion. So 95% chance this can be a ganglion. So when you look at the site, you are 95% sure that this can be a ganglion. And then rest of the examination is to confirm or help your diagnosis.
And also this will guide the rest of your examination. That is very important, because once you realize that it's a ganglion, then transillumination becomes a part of it. But once you realize it's a hernia or a sebaceous cyst, trying to transilluminate it looks stupid, and saying no, it doesn't transilluminate. Or once you diagnose a bony lump and trying to transilluminate looks stupid, I think. So the rest of your examination will be based on this.
Similarly, let's say the same thing what Pramod said, applying that to the wrist. Okay, let's say if someone comes with a lump in the wrist, if you try to eliminate cough impulse in that becomes stupid. So that's how you narrow down the diagnosis.
Another thing is sort of when you are describing the anatomical side, the Norman Brown usually says take a prominent, the known bony prominence or landmark and give dimensions. This becomes sometimes very stupid now. If a lump is in the wrist, you can say it is about 15 or 30 centimeters distal to the medial epicondyle and 3 centimeters. Sorry, 30 centimeters distal and 3 centimeters medial to the medial epicondyle. It doesn't give you any idea. So that anatomical site should have some bearing of recognizing the lump. Right? So there are certain anatomical sites in the body which you should be able to say, right? And the listener know what are the possible lumps or what is he going to say, right? Promote what are those things if you come from head to toe, what are those common anatomical sites which they should know?
Yeah. For example, on the head, if you talk about the forehead, right? So that's a common clinically used term as well.
Very likely to be a derma, right? But it could be a lipoma or sebaceous cyst as well.
Exactly. Yes. Rest of your examination will confirm us whether it's a dermoid or whether it's going to be a sebaceous cyst. And then submental region, another important area. Rather than saying how many centimeters from the chin or angle of the mouth or thyroid cartilage, submental area. You and I both know we're talking the same language, right? Then anterior neck, okay? Then the sternocleidomastoid muscle is a very important landmark. You can say whether it's anterior or posterior to that, right? And there are triangles in the neck. There are levels when you talk about lymph nodes, but some other time these are very confusing. So stick to sort of common clinically used areas or nomenclature, right? If you say things like the parotid region, there is a lump in the parotid region. So both of us know what the parotid region is, right? And rather than saying its relation to the ear or buttocks. And then on the body, then there's the chest, the breasts are there, then the sternal area is there. One important landmark will be jugular notch, right? Sometimes there are keloids over the sternum, so it's an important thing. The clavicle, the supraclavicular area, then the axilla, and if you come below the groin is a common term that we use clinically. There's a groin lump, okay? Paraumbilical area. So umbilical and paraumbilical, we always talk about the difference, right? And the abdomen again is divided into 9 regions, as you know, the hypochondriums, the iliac fossas, the lumbar region. Okay, so based on these commonly used anatomical landmarks or anatomical nomenclature, you should be able to tell us accurately, right? But most of the time, because you think the short case, okay, why? The examiner can also see this. Why should I tell where it is? You just come to focus on the lumbar. No, that is very important because even if you are writing this down on a PhD, you need to first write the site. Then only the reader will be able to picture what you're talking about. So anatomical site, never ever forget, right? Even if we say examine this patient's groin, you come and tell us after you examine, this patient has a lump in his right groin. Right? Don't assume that, okay, examiner told me that there is a lump in the groin, so why should I tell? You start telling by the size of the lump. Size of the lump is least important in hernias, right? So, but I think the factor that they most concentrate is sometimes the size. They spend about 1 or 2 minutes trying to measure it with the tape, with the fingers. It's not very important, right?
So really emphasize the importance of the anatomical site of the lump. So sometimes this will make 100% of the diagnosis. Most of the time it makes about more than 70% of the diagnosis. Then the next important thing when you recognize where the lump is, one thing is you have to observe whether he has got more than one lump and similar lumps elsewhere. Now, if it is paired organ, especially, you have to compare. Right? If there is one lump in the dorsum of the hand, see the other hand as well. If there is not paired, sort of course, you can't do that. Right? So the next important thing is to see the tissue plane as we told you initially. Nalinda, can you tell us how tissue plane will help us to recognize a lump? And how do we do this exam? Looking at the patient. You don't have to do this, only visual impression. Here you have to do certain things, isn't it?
So, sight is very important, as Pramod mentioned. And if you want to really emphasize the size of the lump rather than measuring it, you can say, for example, in a hernia, okay, there's a right side groin lump almost filling the entire groin or extending into the scrotum. So that gives an idea of what sort of lump you are going to deal with. And the size measurement is not that important, but in come to breast, the size matters because the staging situation that you take a measuring tape and measure the exact lump. Just to give a brief idea what the size of the lump, whether to get an idea whether it's a T1, T2 or T3.
Just to add that, some examiners particularly expect them to measure, but overall
Yes.
most of the examiners, I don't think sort of they want the exact measurement.
Yes.
Even if you don't measure, probably measuring is not that idea, but we are trying to tell you is it is not the most important thing.
Can I add one more thing? So if you want to really measure the size rather than having a machine tape slice, you can actually pre-measure the size with a real length of
Yes,
that's
yes,
right.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
that's what we said.
So that is the easiest thing.
And also, even in a breast lump, you should know whether it's larger than 2 centimeters or
Yeah.
5 centimeters, like that. Not that it's 4.5.
Yes.
Right? Because you're never going to get a 4.5 measurement in a clinical setting.
So the next on the tissue plane, please, can you
Please
see the
move
board?
on the screen? Board.
Zoom it up and then. Okay.
So right. So this is the skin. So this is the bone. I'm talking about the limb. We'll take the limb forearm bone, for the forearm. And if there's a lump here, so this is the lump. So we know that the site is, we describe where the site is, anatomical site. Now we are going to find another tissue plane. So now this lump, particular lump I have drawn, it's lying beneath the skin, subcutaneous plane, and it's not attached to the bone or the tendons under the beneath the lump. So how are we going to find whether there is any skin attachment or not? The commonest lump that we find in our surgical practice, which you all come across in your exam situation, is sebaceous cyst. But not all sebaceous cysts will have a punctum. Only about 60% will have a punctum. So if you see a punctum with a blue tone, that itself tells you that this is attached to the skin. Other thing, you can just simply pinch over the lump and see whether there's skin attachment. But having said that, you need to understand not all lumps can be pinched. That depends on the size of the lump and where the lump lies. For example, if it is in a forearm, you can easily pinch. But if it is in the back of your chest, where the skin is thick, you cannot pinch and see, confidently say whether there is skin attachment or not. So one thing that you can do is you can move the skin above the tissue, above the lump into tangential planes and see whether it freely moves and there is no skin tethering when you're doing the movement in relation to the lump. So if it is like that, you can say this is not attached to the skin.
So now can you just show what, now some of them they are third years, what do you mean by teaching and,
Yeah.
Can you ask?
Can you all see? I try to demonstrate something.
There's a bone down there.
Yeah.
Like, okay. I was like,
That's good.
Right.
That's
That's a
better.
lump.
So we'll consider that there's a lump. We'll say this is a subcutaneous lump. And I try to move the skin of the lump. This way, you can see that the skin is freely moving. So now you see. Okay. So can you see that the skin is freely moving?
So when Dr. Nalinda is pulling the skin with his left hand thumb, he released the right hand index finger.
Yeah.
And don't try to sort of pull both ways.
Yeah.
Hari kamba dinna wage depatta. Hari. So then only sort of skin moves over the lump.
Yeah.
Lump is stationary, skin moves over the lump.
And not only one plane, but in two planes, two tangential planes. In
Why
this-
Nalinda you have to do it in two planes? It takes more time.
Yeah, but that will, because beneath the lump, there can be fibers coming in different planes, coming and attaching to the skin. So you have to confidently roll out that attachment by demonstrating the two tangential planes.
So this test to be done in two planes
Yeah.
to make a more accurate result.
Right.
And you said to see whether it is the lump is in the skin or not, or lump is attached to the skin or not, there are two tests to be done.
Yeah.
One thing is you move skin over the lump. Other thing, you
So
pinch skin over
You can
the
pinch
lump.
like this.
So,
Which do what?
right? So you see that is very important. The pinching can cause pain.
Yeah.
So it causes more pain in more sensitive areas, like in face,
Yeah.
right? So it is very important now when you are doing this test not to hurt the patient, right? And it is not the sole idea is demonstrating a physical side, but not to make the patient unhappy also. So pinching cannot be done in very small lump,
Yeah.
and certain parts of the body where the skin is very thick.
So what happens if the lump is attached to the underlying structures like this one? That may be coming from the deep tendons.
Excuse me, can I just ask a fine question? When you say now there can be some lumps which are attached to the skin, and there are some lumps in the plane of the skin or in the skin, like a sebaceous cyst. It's in the skin.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to hear saying that the sebaceous cyst is attached to the skin. And there are some lumps, as you said, Lehman, in the breast cancer, might be, you were mentioning about tethering.
Yes.
Those are attached to the skin, but not in the plane of the skin.
Yeah.
How do you see that? But do you expect the students to differentiate this?
I don't think at their level they need to like lineate
At the
that
beginning
point.
of these things, probably
Yeah, I don't know whether they understood the question. Can I just draw it and at least look at it? So what Pramod asked is, in relation to the skin, there can be three lumps. One can be just a lump which is coming from the skin structures.
rising from
Skin
skin.
appendage.
There can be another lump which is attached to skin at one point, like this. And the third lump could be just at the subcutaneous plane,
Infiltrating into the skin.
maybe
Original
subcutaneous lumps. So there are three lumps. One is this is coming from the skin structures itself, attached to the white area. It's actually from the skin.
The skin.
So this is attached to skin from maybe one point like a sebaceous punctum or maybe fibrous tissue, or else this could be subcutaneous lump.
So in the first scenario, obviously there is skin attachment, you won't be able to freely move the skin. But in the second scenario, when you're moving, there will be prominence of tethering at a particular.
I would further say this would appear like this, like a sebaceous cyst, right? So
In a period like a sebaceous cyst. And when you try to move the skin over the lump, there will be obviously skin attachment. You won't be able to move the lump freely. In the second scenario, where the lump lies in the subcutaneous tissue but is connected to the skin with a some fibers, when you try to move the lump, skin over that lump, there will be a point of tethering, skin tethering, point of anchorage. And the next one is the subcutaneous line lumps. So that we discussed. Next scenario where the lump is now attached to deep structures. So what happens then? So you need to understand what is the underlying muscle group action, whether it's contracting, whether you have to do extension or contraction, flexion. So we see this commonly, they mix up and when they ask you the tissue plane how to demonstrate the deep attachment, they try to do the opposite action and try thinking that it is the correct way, but that's only skin tethering that is only happening. So the commonest scenario is where you have a ganglion in the wrist and we ask whether it's attached to deep structures. So if the ganglion is in the dorsum of your hand, so the underlying muscle group is extension. So you have to examine the lump while the patient is extending the wrist against resistance. So if I can have someone to demonstrate. So if this is the ganglion, now this is in the dorsum of the hand. So if I want to see the its mobility, you have to ask the patient to extend against resistance. And then while the patient is extending, you have to try to move the lump and see whether it's attached to deep structures. And it will get restricted. Before the action, it was somewhat free, mobile, but now it is getting restricted with that action. So that it tells that the lump is attached to deep structures, so arising from the deep structures.
So Nalinda is trying to tell that you can sort of fix deep structures in two ways. One thing, you can stretching the deeper structure.
Yes.
That is also one way of fixing it.
Yeah.
Other thing is contracting.
Contract.
And if it is underlying muscle, the contracting may do two things. One thing, it make the lump more prominent, right? But stretching will not make it prominent. So most appropriate thing is to contract
Yes.
rather than stretching. And if it is in the muscle, definitely you have to do contractions, not the stretching.
Stretching will only fix the lump with the skin tethering, but it is not the.
So I think they understood that it is very important to contract the underlying muscle group rather than stretching it, because it gives two ideas. One thing is make it more prominent,
Yes.
and it will
Restrict the mobility.
Restrict the mobility.
What is the principle behind that? Now you said when you contract the muscle, the mobility gets restricted. So how does it happen?
Because the muscle bulk,
Can we just draw it and show how it happens? What is the principle behind?
So if these are the, this is the, if this is the tendon or the muscle group, if the lump is arising from that, when you contract, it pulls up, and so that this will be get contracted with the muscle group. So then the mobility is getting restricted, but it will be prominent.
Haven't you got to check the mobility in two directions rather than one direction?
Yeah, you can.
Because
Yeah.
you have it in all
because
transverse.
in the direction of the muscle fibers,
Muscle
it
fiber
moves.
moves.
Yeah.
In the opposite direction, the mobility is more restricted.
So what we discussed was, let's say this is the tendon, and there is a lump coming in the tendon like this, right? So if you check the mobility in two directions, one is sideways and one is up and down.
The direction of the fiber.
Yes. So this is the direction of the fiber. So when you check the mobility, when you contract the tendon, both are restricted. But when you check the transverse mobility, it is more actually. Still you can have some mobility compared to the vertical mobility in a long structure or something like a tendon.
And also, Nalinda, as the first instance, when you are trying to attack for attachment, you do it while the arm is relaxed.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And if there is no mobility at that point, do you assume that it's coming from the bone?
That depends on the consistency as well. So that if it is the consistency is bony hard, then that gives some idea as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, it will be not mobile anyway.
And then I think if it is not mobile even when the muscles are relaxed, asking
yeah.
the patient to contract the muscles looks
No.
again a little bit
Yeah.
odd.
Yes.
Just to add one more thing, then now say now when you contract the tendon, so some of the clumps disappear.
Yes.
So that means it's underlying, it's deep to that area.
Yes.
So that gives some idea as to what the underlying pain is.
Plane. Yes. So the anatomical plane gives clues to the underlying diagnosis as well. So the site is important, then the tissue plane, it gives an idea of how to arrive the diagnosis, narrow down your diagnosis.
So can you summarize it again?
So we thought we'll summarize probably every 10-15 minutes as you go on. So Nalinda very nicely described how to recognize the tissue plane. Right? So tissue plane, now for the sake of simplicity, we recognize skin and the deeper structures. So if the lump is in the skin, of course, there are two tests we do to recognize whether the lump is in the skin or not. One thing is pinch the overlying skin. Other thing is move the skin over the lump in two directions. If these two things are positive, we conclude that lump is in the skin or lump is attached to the skin. If these two tests or one of these tests is negative, and we discuss sort of when to perform these two tests, that is based on the size of the lump and the size. Certain areas, the superficial skin cannot be pinched so thick, and sometimes it is very sensitive, very painful. So the pinching test we don't do. So then we want to see whether the lump is in relation to the deeper structures. For that you need the knowledge of the deeper structures. So if it is muscles or tendons, you can either stretch or contract the muscle or the tendon. If the lump is superficial to that muscle, then the lump muscle is contracted or lump is attached to the superficial part of the lump muscle. When the muscle is contracted, lump become more prominent. To assess, and the mobility of the lump is restricted. So mobility of the lump is assessed, moving the lump in two directions. If the lump is attached to the more deeper parts of the lump or deeper aspect of the muscle, when the muscle is contracted, lump become less prominent, and still it is mobility is restricted. So by fixing the underlying structures, we observe two things. One thing is the mobility, other thing is the prominence of the lump. Based on that, we can say the relationship of the lump to the underlying muscle. Bone is a very fixed structure. We don't have to fix it. So when you can't move the lump over the bone, right? So we think it is attached to the bone or rising from the bone. And to do these tests, now Nalinda was trying to do this test on Rohan's hand. One small thing is sort of when you're moving a structure, it is very simple physics, you have to fix that structure. So he was sort of keeping the hand in the air. So rather than you fix the hand on a bed or on a table or chair, on his lap and move it, then there won't be a relative movement of the organ and the lump. So you have to avoid that as well. Especially this is important in examination of a hydrocele. I think someone might sort of explain, or one fine day we will talk on that, how to sort of do the special lumps, right? Rohan, can you recap from the beginning?
Can I just add one thing we didn't tell? Why it is important to look at the tissue plane. We told how to measure, how to do the tissue plane, but we didn't tell why it is important to find out the tissue plane. Okay, first we said
Anatomical.
First patient comes, you look at the location and you look at certain possible diagnosis. And then we go to the site. Now there are three lumps that three possible options that we can get from our test, clinical examination. Could be attached to the skin like this, or it could be in the subcutaneous plane, or it could be in the deep fascia, or this is a muscle, this is a bone, or it could be coming from the bone, or maybe it's coming from the muscles, or maybe attached to deep fascia. So these are the possible three tissue planes. So let's say you take this lump. There are certain lumps that arise from the skin. Like sebaceous cyst, maybe fibromas, maybe dermoids. So any cell that is in the skin can give rise to lump attached to the skin. So that is why it is important for us to see whether this is coming from the skin, because we narrow down further our sets of diagnosis. For example, if you take subcutaneous lump, you find this is a subcutaneous lump. There are cells in the subcutaneous tissue like lipoma, then there are nerves, there are vessels, fibromas. So these are the possibilities that you might get. Similarly, in the deep planes, is it muscle lump, or is it an intramuscular lipoma? Is it a neuroma coming from inside the nerves, or is it a body lump? So that is why it is important to say the tissue claim.
Also, for exam purposes, I think the way you elicit now, as the Nalinda showed, how much confidence you have in eliciting this is also very important at exam point. Because I think, sir, even two students can perform the same, so they elicit the same sign and get different marks, depending on how you do it.
That means how confidently you do it.
Exactly.
But we observe them, they repeatedly do things.
Exactly.
Right? Without acquiring adequate data. You need only one time to do this.
Yes.
Maximum 2 times if you are not sure.
Yes.
Right? If you keep on doing this.
Yes. So it depends on how much you have practiced it with patients. If you are touching a patient for the first time, we will see the tremor. We will see you stuttering and stammering. That is, you do unnecessary movements and you do it several times without any efficiency. And then you may say, I elicited that it's a subcutaneous lump, but you may have scored for 50 marks versus someone who does it with confidence who gets 70 marks. So that affects your outcome.
And it is not a role play, no. What they try to do is sort of not to show us that you are trying to do this. Most of the students think that more than its clinical value, they want to show us that they are doing this. We will observe. We know how to observe, and we are very good at it. And so don't act as an actor there, but act as a player.
Can I raise one more question? Now, during the exam, so practical session, so some of the students try to talk as they examine. How practical or how valid is it?
Both ways are okay. Some students explain their clinical findings while they are performing. Some others keep on sort of performing while examiner is observing. And if examiner wants to clarify certain things, examiner will ask. Some examiners do ask students to explain while they are performing. So either way is okay. But if you are very confident, if you are very confident, I think the best thing is to explain or talk while you are performing. Right? For this, you need good knowledge and good practice and confidence more than anything.
Confidence. This is a motor skill. That's what they have to realize actually. Performing eliciting clinical science is a motor skill. You can't study that for 2 weeks during your study leave. Come and do magic at the exam. Right? Whatever you do, you need to perform it on a living patient. So we can see whether you have practiced or not.
So now we have discussed 3 aspects of lung.
2 aspects.
So we have already discussed 2 aspects, and we told you about there are 3 main important aspects. One thing is the anatomical side, that is just by looking at you know where it is, and then you have to perform certain things. Right? Your real physical examination comes there, but observation is also part of your physical examination. The site, whether it is paired organ or not, comparing, and the overlying scars and all that comes there. Then, as Nalinda explained, the recognizing the tissue plane. Now, we know different lumps or different tissues in the body has different textures, consistency, or it feels differently. So, if we recognize that, it is that will add some value for your diagnosis. Rohan, can you tell us how to recognize, or how do we clinically recognize now? Of course, we can do many other tests to recognize the consistency of the lump or what it is made up of. How do we clinically recognize what is it made up of?
And how, and also why is also another important question to answer, I think. Let's take example. We'll take a patient. We'll take a patient coming with a sebaceous cyst. Okay, we know that the patient is having a sebaceous cyst, and I think now you should get the idea. Okay, if you say sebaceous cyst, it is a lump that you get in a subcutaneous tissue, but it is arising from it's attached to the skin because it is arising from sebaceous gland, and we know that it contains. If you cut a sebaceous cyst, it contains toothpaste, bit of dark toothpaste-like material covered with a membrane. So that is what we mean by sebaceous cyst. Let's assume now we don't know whether it's sebaceous cyst. This patient says, okay, I have a lump. This is the scapula, inferior angle of the scapula. So as now Pramod described, now let's say we have site we know, inferior angle of the scapula. And when you look at this region, if you look at the anatomical structures, it can arise from the skin, it can arise from the subcutaneous tissue, it can arise from the muscle underneath, it can arise from the bone. So anything is possible. Then, as Nalendra described, we move to this part. That is, we look at the tissue plane. Let's assume now, because this is sebaceous cyst, now we know after doing the test, we know the lump is something like this. It is attached to the skin at one point. It is skin lump, but there is some mobility of the skin over the lump. So that is the possibility. This is the next step. So we have done that. But then still we can't say what it is because it can be anything. It can be a lipoma which is attached to the which is in subcutaneous tissue plane. It can be a fibroma with a small attachment. So we don't know what it is still. But then the next important thing is describe what is inside the lump, and that will give you, okay, sebaceous cyst, we know it has a very dark material inside. Compared to lipoma, it's completely different. So if you can describe what is inside the lump, you can get further idea and get further narrow down the diagnosis. So it's important. That is why it is important to find out what is inside the lump. So there are two physical signs that we do for that. There are two physical signs. One is transillumination, other one is fluctuation. Right? So these are the two physical signs that we elicit to look at the contents inside the lump.
I rather prefer if you say fluctuation followed by transillumination.
Okay, I think that's correct because we'll come to that later why it is important. Okay, I agree. First thing should be fluctuation and then subsequently transillumination.
Should we say that consistency is more important when it comes to translation of whether it contains fluid or solid stuff?
Yes, yeah. So these are the two physical signs that you can demonstrate, but eventually, of course, that thing I think I agree, the consistency of the lump. Right? So if it is a lump is a bony hard consistency, then there's no point in doing further investigation, further tests.
So basically, what we are telling is now any matter in this world exists in three forms.
Yes.
One is solid, liquid, gas. Gaseous lumps in the body is very rare unless you get a lung hernia or pneumocele. So more in all practical purposes, we get only solid or liquid lumps. So to differentiate solid or liquid lump, we do certain tests.
Yes. So let's say this is a lump, and when you touch the lump, if it is hard, then it is a completely solid lump. Then it's very unlikely that it can be anything further. So you can confidently say it's a bony lump, and there is no need of doing fluctuation and transillumination in a lump like that. Let's assume that this lump is not a bony lump. You are not sure it is not a bony lump, and then you move on to these two tests. One is fluctuation and transillumination. Now the principle behind fluctuation is now let's cross fluctuation. Okay, this is a lump. The lump has a wall which is expandable. It is not a rigid wall that you have around the lump. It is expandable. It's like a balloon. It's something like this. So if you, I need to refer this physics principle. It's Pascal's law. If you apply pressure on one point of the lump, right? If you apply pressure of any structure, expandable structure which contains fluid, this is not for a solid lump. If it contains fluid or semi-solid material, and if you apply pressure here, this pressure that you apply is equally distributed in the lump inside. So let's say you apply pressure here, and the pressure inside the lump builds up, and this bulges in, and this pressure is applied to the wall of the lump, laterally applied. So because the wall is expandable, the lump expands on either side, right? So if you simplify that, this lump, if you apply, now this is the lump, you apply pressure here, and after applying the pressure, lump gets expanded, it becomes something like this. And that is the principle that you use in physics to apply the cross fluctuation. And how you do it is, so same lump, cross fluctuation. You keep your finger on either side first, and
So
then
you grab the lump,
grab
so
the lump, fix the lump.
with a thumb and another finger. Depend on the size of the lump.
Yeah.
If it is too small, you can use thumb and index finger. Little bigger, thumb and middle finger, likewise.
Yeah, and then you apply pressure on top of the lump like this. And if it is expandable, you will feel and you will see that the fingers are moving. Your fingers are moving on either side. And they have to do on two directions because it can be a solid or cystic combined lump. So just to confirm that this lump is uniformly cystic, you do the cross fluctuation in two directions. Right?
And we have to mention that it doesn't stay indented, there's another physical sign.
Yes.
Sign of indentation.
Indentation is another will come. So that is cross fluctuation. If you have cross fluctuation, that means a lump inside this lump, it is liquid or semi-solid, and it is expandable.
Rohan, I think it is more clear if you try to demonstrate on this lump.
Maybe like this.
You see there is a lump here.
Yes.
And when you apply pressure, it gets bigger.
Yeah.
Actually, the volume is same. But
So that is the compressibility of the liquid.
Yes.
Liquids can be compressed, solids cannot be compressed.
It takes more space.
So it deform and make different shape.
yes, so that's the same principle.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
Right, close.
The next important physical sign is, okay, we know now inside the lump you have a liquid, but then liquids can be different. You can have different liquids. Sometimes you can have water, clear fluid, or sometimes it can be pus, sometimes it can be blood, or sometimes it can be fluid like a sebaceous material. So it's very important to know the color of the material. Transparency, but it indicates a color. So sometimes it can be transparent, sometimes it can be non-transparent. Actually, not the color, whether it is transparent or not. So that is the next important physical sign that we can elicit.
So that is elicited only in lumps which has
Fluid.
cross fluctuation.
That is
If
fluid.
the lung doesn't have cross fluctuation, no
There is
point
no point in finding out.
transillumination.
Yeah, no point in finding out whether it is clear fluid or not.
So if a candidate try to elicit transillumination in the non-cross fluctuating lump, we get an idea that he doesn't know the principle behind cross fluctuation. One thing is we have to elicit cross fluctuation before transillumination. Other thing is if the lump is not cross fluctuating, you don't have to do transillumination.
There can be also exceptions.
That's what I'm telling now. But I have seen and read in textbooks now certain non-liquid lumps like lipomas. They also transilluminate for some extent.
And they also fluctuate.
They also fluctuate because during anatomy days we were taught that sort of the fat it is in the liquid form in the body, but as a surgeon I never experienced it. Pramod, can you tell why is that dilemma?
Lipid. So in a lipoma, the fat is also inside the cells. It's in fat globule state. So this is acting as a collection of liquid fat. Although the tissue itself is taken as solid, it is a combination of small fat-filled cells. So it works as a combination. It looks as a what you call in singular parallel. Right? It's a liquid. And also the other exception is when you have a tensely cystic lump, like a ganglion, you might not be able to elicit cross fluctuation.
And even tense hydroceles.
Hydroceles, right? When they are tense, when there is very high pressure, you cannot compress furthermore. The wall, the other limiting factor is not the fluid, but the wall has expanded to its limits. So you cannot deform the shape. So those things are not hard, but they are firm. Or you can use the term tensely cystic if you're confident. The best example are the large hydroseals and the ganglion. There you can see brilliant transillumination without cross fluctuation.
So there are few exceptions to the common rule. Right? So important to know that. And most of the time we know what this lump is based on the anatomical site and the tissue plane.
Okay, the physics principle of what you said was now we said when you apply pressure, right? When you apply pressure, the pressure inside this builds up and it alters the shape. So that is the common thing that happens. But then it can be so tense that the capsule of this lump is already
Stretched to the
maximum.
One thing is straight, other thing is it's thickened. In chronic hydrocele, it's thickened.
So
it
they
cannot be
cannot be expanded
stretched.
further. For some reason, either it is too dense or either ball is too thick. It cannot be expanded further. So when you try to compress, it doesn't fluctuate.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
So when it comes to cross-structure, have you got to do this in two planes again, two directions again?
Yes.
Because if you try to do this in a muscle, so you can also get some expansion kind of impulse.
But
Only in one direction.
So that's why you are doing two directions.
Yes.
Yeah. So we said now this lump, we know that it has a liquid material, and then liquid, or it could be sometimes even liquid material like lipomas. We said it still can transilluminate. So can be any type of liquid material. Then we said there can be two types of liquid material. It could be clear or it could be unclear material. So next physical study is to find out whether the contents have a clear material inside or a unclear material. Now the principle or how you do that is, we know that when you put up a light, right? And when the light enters into a medium, and if the medium contains a colored material, the light is absorbed by this colored material, and you don't see the light coming out from this lump. So if the material is big, the clear light that you flush into that you put into the lump, the medium gets absorbed and it does not come out. So you won't see anything coming out. When you put the light, it will not come out. But if the material that you have inside is a clear material like water, the light travels through this and it comes out. But there is something else that happens. When the light crosses two mediums, let's say this is water and this is air. And when there is interface between water and air, there is something called total internal reflection. So not all the light is transmitted out. Some of the light that comes with the angle to the wall is transmitted back. So it's like there is a lot of light that gets trapped inside, and it travels inside the lump, and some of it will come out, and some of it is trapped inside, and it travels inside. Total internal reflection. Now can we show this physics?
So now, when you do that,
We have example here.
okay.
Okay, now this is a lump. Right.
Now you have to make it darker. So that is why you use this special gadget. Or in the board sort of you can you see?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there.
Right, you see, it's like a bulb when we flash the light.
So this actually contains water inside this balloon.
So like, right in other name. Right, okay. It is flashing. Now. That's better. Right. Okay.
Now that's a lump that contains clear fluid. But whereas if you take a lump which contains, now this contains yogurt. I
This
think.
also sort of fluctuate.
But this contains yogurt. So it's a turbid material and the light does not travel through that, and light is absorbed and you don't see illumination in this lump. So that is the basic physics principle behind transillumination. If a lump is very well transilluminating like this,
How much is this considered?
yeah. Now this is somewhat transilluminating, there's no.
It is.
Now we are not comparing that to a clear. Now let's say your finger is completely translucent, or sorry, like a glass. Then what you see here is not maybe much more than this, but this also contains some amount of total internal reflection here.
So before transilluminating a lump, this shows us we have to compare the normal transillumination of the surrounding tissue,
Yes.
or the skin transillumination.
Yes.
So you flash the light onto the normal skin to see or appreciate the normal transillumination. Then you flash it onto the lump, and now not only flashing, you unflash it, switch it off, and flash it. Right? Then you appreciate the transillumination properly, and you probably use this illuminoscope, or you have to darken that area. You have to do either to see it very well. Principle is same. The way you do it, one thing is you have to fix the lump. Always sort of when you are examining a lump, you have to fix the lump. Otherwise, you can't eliminate cross fluctuation, because lump itself will fluctuate. Then transillumination, you have to compare it with the normal tissue transillumination and the transillumination of the lump. For that, you have to darken the area, or you have to use the illuminoscope.
So the lump that we were talking about, okay, so for a patient coming in the back of the chest lump, so back of the chest, you think of certain possible anatomical structures, and then we looked at the tissue plane. We felt that the lump was attached to the skin, possibility of sedation cyst, maybe fibroma attached to the skin, and then we looked at the cross fluctuation. Consistency is not a hard lump. We excluded that it is a bony lump. And then we looked at the cross fluctuation. The lump cross fluctuated. Then we felt that because of that, we felt that it's a cystic lump which contains fluid material inside it. And then we looked at the transillumination, which told us, okay, this is a lump that contains turbid material, and that helped us to come to the diagnosis of a sebaceous cyst.
Good. One small thing, when you are assessing the consistency, if it is not cystic, the solid lump could exist in the body in three forms. One could be very hard, like bone. We call it bony hard. Then you can have firm lump, right? It is not bony hard, but it's like contracted muscle, the consistency of a contracted muscle, or very soft lump. So you should be able to say that it is a soft lump, it's a firm lump, or a hard lump. When you say hard lump, it means it is a bony hard. Reference is the bone. Hard, firm, the reference is contracted muscle. Soft is any other lump. So far I think we have done 95% of the exact principles of examination of the lump. If you know these three, definitely you will score more than 70% of the marks. I assure you, right? But to make you more professional, or to get more marks, I think, and some examiners expect this professionalism more from you, and that is also considered as a bare minimum level of skills. So one thing is, when you are approaching a patient in the short case or in the clinic, it doesn't matter. Important thing is around there are sort of the sanitizers and the wash basins. So you wash your hands, or you request to wash your hand, and these days you have to wear your mask and visors as well. So those two are also important. Then introduce yourself, that you are a medical student or a trainee doctor. Then you have to say that you are going to examine this patient's lump, right? In order to come into a diagnosis, that is objective now. For that, you have to see this and you have to feel this, right? So I'm going to see it and I'm going to touch it, right? If you get any pain, I'm not going to hurt you, but there may be a bit of a discomfort, at any point if you feel uncomfortable, let you know. So ටික හරි ඉක්මනට කියන්න පුළුවන් එක වාක්‍යයක්. මම පුහුණු වෙන වෛද්‍යවරයෙක් මම ඔයාගේ මේ ගෙඩිය මොකද්ද කියලා බලන්න ආවේ. මම මේක පොඩ්ඩක් බලනවා ඊට පස්සේ මම අල්ලලා බලනවා. ඒක රිදෙන්නේ නැති වෙන්නේ නැහැ මම මේක කරන්නේ. පොඩ්ඩක් හරි රිදෙන්න හකුවොත් මට ඉක්මනටම කියන්න. මේ ඒකට අපිට ඒක නවත්තන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. So and then you that's about more than less than even half a minute, few seconds. Then good to know. If you know these things, you will definitely get more marks. The other thing is sort of there are certain special features or special physical signs of a lump. Now, for example, a vascular lump has sort of certain special physical signs rather than what we have discussed so far, like pulsatile, compressibility, emptying, sign of emptying. Arun, can you tell us something about those things?
When it comes to the vascular lumps, so there are not many vascular lumps. Like for the exam, what we give is the common things, right? So one of the vascular lumps could be the arteriovenous malformation, or it can be a venous malformation, or it can be an aneurysm, or a small aneurysm coming from the wrist, and you can get radial aneurysm, like that. Saphenogarics, yes, developing venous malformation. So if we talk about the arteriovenous malformation, there are not, we can broadly categorize this fast flowing or slow flowing, because the amount of blood which carries signifies whether it's prominence is arterial predominant or venous predominant. And also there can be lymphatic malformation also. So these are all considered vascular malformations, right? If you consider mainly venous predominant or mainly or totally venous thing, so one of the physical signs here basically is a dependent kind of a swelling, or you can more prominent or dependent position. And when you raise the, say it's the arm, so when you raise the arm, so it empties because of gravity. So it's venous predominant. And all the other thing is there can be skin changes on the lump. Like in venous malformation, there can be bluish discoloration on examination. So that itself signifies this is kind of a vascular problem because the color issues and also when raising, so effective gravity empties. The other thing is there may not be, it may not still be empty. Then there will be pulsatility. You see whether it's a pulsatility. You can see that the palpitations coming up. So that means there's an arterial predominant issue there. That situation you can actually check there is a pulsatile mass, as you can see in this picture in the neck. This is mainly venous, but there is some arterial contribution as well. That's why there's a hyperemia. And second pictures, so you can see on the right side, the abdominal lump. Obviously, very prominent. One thing we have to demonstrate is there is an intra-abdominal or extra-abdominal. So we have to ask which contractinosis by looking the raise in the legs or the raise in the arm. That's where you can extra. The intra-abdominal, of course, we have to see whether it's the balance or retroperitoneum. If it's a retroperitoneum, of course, it's not mobile with respirations. It's fixed. So there is fixed lump. So then we have to see whether it's a pulsatile or not. It's a midline lump, most likely aneurysm, idic aneurysm. So pulsatility, also there is an expansion, kind of a pulsatility. So we have to keep our fingers for the hand on both sides of the lump and see whether it's there's a kind of expansion impulse. It's not a cough impulse, but there's an expansion. With each pulsations, the lump moves outwards. So that's what happened in the arterial lumps.
So what is the transmitted pulse?
The transmitted pulse is that if you have kind of a, say, normal aorta in thin individuals, so you can have a still pulse pattern through that one. So that's a normal thing, but it's not expansive. There's no actual lumpy feel, but there's kind of a lump, pulsatility feel through the abdomen. There's no lump. So that is a transmitted pulse. Also, say there's a lump on top of the artery, So they can still have pulsatility because of the action of the blood circulation underneath, but it is not having any expansion of impulse.
Like in lymph node or
So those are the, I think, one of the things we have to demonstrate when it comes to vascular functions.
Only about 1.5 hours.
Yeah. So we may have to wind up. Just to sort of complete, we didn't discuss about.
Will they have
Do they have any questions?
They can type up if they have questions.
If you have questions, type up. These are not so important things, and we are just sort of mention for the sake of completeness.
So one thing can I mention for the completeness sake, due to that complete internal reflection, you don't have to keep the illuminoscope and the torch in line.
In line.
Right? You can keep it in an angle. It should be transilluminating. It is especially important in hydroseals where students try to put the torch on one side and so you don't need to do it. If it's transilluminating, you can see it on any side.
So other few things, you can type these things. The things which we didn't mention, important lumps, these sort of abdominal lumps we'll discuss some other day. Still the plane of the tissue plane is important, but here it is the tissue plane is abdominal wall, intra-abdominal or retroperitoneal lumps. So we do different maneuvers, but the same principles are applied. We'll talk on another day. And the other special feature of a lump is like in vascular lumps, nerve lumps or the nerves in relation to a lump. We have to examine a particular nerve there. So like in parotid lump, if you are examining, you know the parotid gland, the facial nerve is in between the deep and superficial lobe of the parotid. So it is important to examine the parotid facial nerve. And if it is a submandibular, recurrent submandibular lump, the examination of the marginal mandibular nerve is also important. So likewise, then other common and very important lump is lymph nodes, usually in the neck, but you can get anywhere else. But when you get a lymph node enlargement, there are three main types of lymph node enlargement. You can get solitary lymph node enlargement, that is extremely rare, but you can get regional lymph node enlargement and lymph node enlargement as a part of generalized lymphadenopathy. So it is important to examine other nodes as well, and the large organs of the reticuloendothelial system like spleen and the liver. And the other thing of the lymph node is when you see a lymph node enlargement, you should try the underlying reason for the lymph node enlargement. It is a regional pathology or generalized pathology as well. So it is important to examine the other structures in the draining areas of the lymph nodes in addition to that. So these are small things, but you will learn when you are doing your clinical appointment. But bare minimum basic you should know is the anatomical side, surgical plane or the tissue plane, and the consistency of the lump. If you don't do those three, you won't score any marks, whatever you do after that.
Here only one lump in the body, but she also.
There is one.
They answer the body's indentation.
Okay.
Yeah, just one more thing. So when you ask one lump, so we had to always ask if there are any other lumps in the body also, because there can be multiple things.
Compare,
especially basis is maybe the lipomas, they come in multiple.
Yeah, the question they have asked is what is indentation? Now, this lump, let's assume that this is a lump. Okay, now this lump contains fluid. This lump contains water. So when you press this lump, it expands and then it comes back. Now imagine inside this lump there is cement. Right? If you have cement inside this lump, what will happen? Prepared cement, not powder. Toothpaste or prepared cement. So if you press it, the lump that you have or the depression that you have made will be there at least until you press from other side. So that is what you call indentation. When you have the material like that, the mark that you make on the lump is temporarily there for some time until it reverts back. It will be there.
So that the indent you made is remain for some time. Now, Rohan, cement is not found in the body, no?
Yes.
So why do we have sort of described this physical science? What are the common, or what are the lumps which we can elicit indentation?
Okay, the commonest material that we get is sebaceous material, sebum. Sebum is like toothpaste that we discussed earlier. Sometimes implantation, dermoid also gets sort of a material like that.
Dermoid, yes.
Yeah, dermoid.
And the feces
Some-
as well.
Yeah, if you sometimes you examine.
Intradermal mass.
Right. So this is not a common physical sign. You may elicit this in sebaceous cyst, but even in a sebaceous cyst, you may not be able to elicit this thing. But don't try to press hard or rupture the lump trying to elicit indentation. That's another question.
How to do fluctuation and elimination? A very small lump, very easy. Don't do it.
Can't do it. There are certain things which you can't do. So you have to appreciate that you can't do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's also practice and confidence. This is what happens if you just keep reading books. You try to do everything to every lump, right? If you have practically faced this, you will know that you can't do it.
Don't do that.
Okay, that's enough. Next, right? That's fine.